we've already done a bunch of energy talks, right? And the last one was Age of Energy Abundance. Is it closer than we think? It's pretty much a year ago. And with Patsy, we came up with the idea solar going ballistic in Bristol, which it isn't. So the question then became, what do we do? By the way, this is me being a little bit clever. That QR, can you see a QR code?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you aim your camera at that, it will link to the write-up of this week's talk, which is kind of fun. But that's just me playing with technology. So, but what is true is that solar is still growing exponentially. And exponential growth seems very gradual because, just growing like 60% a year, that's not very much. But when you look over a few years, things have changed a lot. And I hope to sort of cover that. Oh, that was funny. Those arrows moving around. That was clever. So in the Age of Energy Abundance talk, I talked about some of the history of what's been going on in Bristol, starting with the peak oil report and ending up with City Leap. And then I projected exponentially forward. And as you can see, I'm expecting basically three big steps from the beginning of last year and no, from earlier, the beginning of the year before. And, I'm expecting it to be huge by 2030, but we aren't there yet. We are in 2024. That's where we are. And we're still playing around with plans and pilots. But that means that things should be sort of moving forward, moving into place. And so that's kind of why I called it, I want to call it energy snakes and ladders, because at the moment, it seems like a good analogy. There's some good things happening, and there are things standing in the way of progress. So I thought, I was playing around with this a couple of days ago, and I thought, okay, so how would we represent this? And that's funny. I fed it into Bing, which is Microsoft's search engine, which now has artificial intelligence attached to it and the possibility to draw pictures. And I just said, draw me a picture of a futuristic snakes and ladders game with snakes and ladders, and it's based around energy. And it sort of came up with that, energy, snakes and ladders. And it actually came up with a few examples. So here's another one, which I asked it to focus a bit more on electric cars and solar panels. So this is fantastic. I could never in a million years come up with an illustration like that. And it came up with half a dozen in a couple of minutes. So I asked it to visualize a future with houses with solar roofs and electric cars. And as you can see, it came up with this sort of surreal picture of a charging station and the guy sitting on, that looks really weird. So I said, that's not quite what I'm looking for. Could you draw me another one? It sort of came up with that. Electric car on a solar roof. It's not quite what I wanted. Like, how about like a street scene with solar roofs and electric cars? And it came up with that and the next one. And I thought, well, it's okay, but I mean, it doesn't relate to us. So I said, can you give me a street scene based on terraced houses in a city street, like Saxon Road in St. Werburgh's, Bristol? And it came up with that, right? And my jaw dropped. And in the earlier ones, you can even see the solar panels on the roof. So like really weird. The panels are different sizes. They go off the top of the roof. Now it's getting a little bit more sensible. And then I said, okay, it still looks a bit techno. Can you put children in the street? and it came up with that. And this one, which is my favorite, this is the competition winner. That's Saxon Road in St. Werburgh's in the future, visualized by an AI. And I sent that to a friend, and they just thought it was a photo. I had to explain that this was drawn by an AI, and they said, that's not possible. Anyway, so this was just me faffing around and having fun before I prepare a talk, sitting at my computer doing stuff and feeling the power of AI to help me. And now I'm going to drop down into real world. But the point is that engine that I was using was created by a company called OpenAI, whose chairman and chief exec is a guy called Sam Altman. And he's saying the cost of intelligence and energy are going to be on a path towards near zero. Well, I just got 20 illustrations for nothing yesterday, from which are as good as you could ever hope for from a graphic designer. We certainly won't get all the way there this decade, but by 2030 it will become clear that and he's saying renewable and nuclear energy. We may not need nuclear energy. So last year, what gave me cause for hope and what made me think we could be close to an age of energy abundance was books like Mark Jacobson's No Miracles Needed. And he's explaining in that book how a bunch of different technologies are coming together. They're already good enough to provide for all our needs. And he's saying wind, water, and solar sources to ensure reliable electricity and heat supplies. Well, various miracles have happened, and I'm going to mention some of them under ladders. And the first one is the idea from a man called Tony Seba, who works with a think tank called Rethink X. And they work with exponential growth forecasts. And they say that growth is exponential. Other people don't get it right. They consistently get things right when other people don't. And he's saying that the energy future that we want doesn't rely on wind and solar and nuclear and everything. You can get everything you need just from too much solar energy plus too much battery energy. And within 10, 20 minutes, you'll have a good sense of that, I hope. That's Tony Seba talking at an event and being blogged by somebody I follow called the Electric Viking. And he's talking to a bunch of oil sheikhs who are sitting there quite happily eating their nice food. And he's telling them that the oil age isn't going to last as long as they think. Now, this is a video, and I'm just going to play you 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes.
Matthias Saunders says that.
And this is Tony, that's the Electric Viking. I'm fast forwarding to about 3:30. And I hope this will capture the nub of it.
Whether or not he was right, or whether or not all the pessimists were right. In his book, Solar Trillions, Tony Seba wrote the price of a kilowatt hour of solar electricity would be 4 to 5 cents in 2020, when the price was sitting at 30 cents when he made the prediction.
Right? I predicted it. I said PV was going to drop by 80 to 90% in the 2010s. Boom, right? Cost curves, gravity. So it happened as predicted. And today in many countries, including the US, in the US, 92% of projects waiting to be interconnected to the grid are solar or wind. And 99% of storage is batteries, right? Here's the convergence. It's happening.
He was saying the price would go from 30 cents to 4 to 5 cents in only 10 years. The International Energy Agency, or the IEA, believed it would stay about the same. Even other so-called naive optimists like Ramez Nan, who believed in a halving between 2010 to 2020, in other words, a price of around 15 cents, turned out to be too pessimistic for what would really happen. Now, for the price to do what it did, for Tony Seiber's prediction to be correct, it meant that the price of electricity had to fall by 90% in only 10 years. Just because he's been right historically, it doesn't mean that Tony Seiber is now right in his newest predictions. Now, of course, prices fell by 93%, so he was right. However, people are now saying his newest predictions are just crazy.
You don't need seasonal storage. You don't need hydrogen. You only need 1, 2, 3, 5 days of battery storage. And it's a phase change transformation into a new system. And essentially, it's non-linear. So why does it work? Well, what we found when we studied this was a new property which we call the clean energy U-curve, which says you can essentially trade off storage and generation. So the more generation you have, the less storage you need. It's not intuitive, but we found that. But it's along a U-curve. Right? So if you design the system for the bottom of the U, derivative is equal to 0, then you get massive amounts of power, 2, 3, 4, 5 times more power the rest of the year, which we call superpower.
That said, he doesn't pluck his predictions out of thin air.
Okay, so could you hear that?
Yes.
It's not particularly clear, but I'm going to just make the points briefly again anyway. And that is this is the sort of thing that I nerdily watch, right? And I saw that video at the beginning of the year, and then over the course of a week, there were a bunch more new announcements, including about solar panels. So these are the ladders. First of all, Tony Seiber is saying that we could get all the energy we need from exponential solar plus batteries. And there are loads of other possibilities, but Tony Seiber is saying this will be the cheapest one. This is what will give us cheapest energy. The next one is there's a largest Chinese solar panel manufacturer is now in the process of building 500-watt solar panels. Well, when we started putting solar on roofs, when the feed-in tariffs came in around about 2011, the solar panels you could get were 200 watts, not 500. When we put solar on the roof of Hamilton House in Stokescroft, the solar panels we put on were 250 watts. If you paid a big premium, you could get 300 and 330 watt solar panels, but they were more expensive. So you could get more on the roof, but it cost more. Right now, the standard solar panels that you get at the regular price are 400 watt panels. And we're saying in a year or two, it's going to be 500 watts. So what this means is, if you wanted to put 4 kilowatts of solar on a roof, it used to take 20 panels. Now you can do it with 10, and in a couple of years' time, you'll be able to do it with 8. Your roof hasn't got any smaller, you're just using less of it. But what if you maxed out your roof? And Bristol has a study that says there's room for 500 megawatts of solar on 98,000 roofs in Bristol. That's about half the roofs. Great. But that was 3 years ago. In 2 years' time, that 500 megawatts, without changing anything, becomes a gigawatt, because the panels will be twice as powerful as they were 3 years ago. So that's part of the ladder effect. We're going to be able to get almost an excess of energy off our roofs. With the old panels, we found that an average house in Lockleys could generate as much electricity as it would use in a year. Well, with panels that are twice as powerful, it would mean and generate all its vehicle fuel as well. So things are changing. Okay. Here's another one. CATL is the largest manufacturer of electric batteries for electric cars in the world, makes a third of all the batteries. And at the moment, you can see what I've written there. People have range anxiety with their cars because, oh, the battery only does 200 miles and on a bad day it won't even do that. I'm not even, where am I going to recharge? CATL have announced that they are making a 1,000-mile EV battery, and a group at MIT working with Lamborghini, who are owned by Volkswagen, are saying they've also got a 1,000-mile electric vehicle battery. So instead of nothing like the range of a petrol car, we're going to have electric batteries which are twice the range of a petrol car. Crazy. And Tony Seba, the other announcement, there are loads of hundreds of obvious questions come to mind. Yes, but electric cars are so expensive, right? A whatever it is costs 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pounds. So Tony Seba was predicting, and CATL were saying the cost of we reduced the cost of batteries by a third last year, and this year we're going to reduce the cost by half again. How does that happen? Cheaper materials, they're using different materials, and they're building robot factories. Robots will assemble vehicle batteries. And so Tony Seba was predicting that the price of electric cars would come down and it would be $12,500 by 2027 and $5,000 for a simple electric car by 2030. And he's saying his forecasting method, he's wrong now, but he's less wrong than anybody else, because £12,500 EVs have already arrived. $12,500. So this means you can buy an electric car cheaper than a petrol car. It's going to have a range longer than a petrol car. The battery will last 1,000,000 miles. They're already making 1,000,000-mile batteries. So what we're seeing is things that were dodgy and iffy a few years ago are suddenly flipping, just like they did with digital cameras. The first digital cameras were rubbish. They were grainy. People said they would never, ever, ever replace film photography. And now you have 3 or 4 cameras inside a phone, and the resolution is really, really high. And you can do things with computerized photos that you just can't do with a film photo. So I'm not even sure what my points 6 and 7 are. Okay. Mark Carney, who was governor of the Bank of England, was saying while he was governor at the Bank of England that companies that own fossil fuel reserves need to start getting worried. Because if we took all their reserves out of the ground and turned them from assets on your balance sheet into real money, it would create 5 degrees of global warming, and we would eliminate life on Earth. So when he stopped being governor of the Bank of England, he went back to Canada, and he's now chairman of a company called Brookfield Asset Management. And he's saying that investments in electric vehicles and in solar energy and renewable energy are running at 4 times the level of fossil energy. Well, the question is it going to overtake? Well, there are already fossil energy plants shutting down because they're being replaced by solar energy plants because the solar energy is cheaper. And there are already whole economies announcing that their emissions have peaked and are starting to go down. So it's a matter of, and China will announce that this year or next, and the rest of the world will follow suit. That doesn't mean that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere isn't still going up, but it's the rate at which it's going up will peak and other things will improve. And then the other thing is we have massive support from our governments. If we elect the right one, Labour's going to invest 28 billion a year in a green industrial revolution. Oh, sorry about that. No, we aren't, says Keir Starmer. So the difference between points 1 to 6 and point 7 is that points 1 to 6 have got, sorry, somebody's calling me and I'm going to, points 1 to 6 are technical, point 7 is political. And that brings us on to the topic of snakes. We can't trust our politicians. We can't trust our fossil energy companies, but technology is advancing relentlessly. So I'm going to describe some of the things that are standing in the way. At the moment, there is an arbitrary limit that you can only put about 4 kilowatts of solar on a roof without asking for planning permission. Why is that? The energy distribution networks have arbitrarily said, well, if you put loads and loads of generation on all the roofs, it could overload the grid. Whereas if you put up a solar farm, they say, anytime you start overloading the grid, we're going to tell you to turn it off. And they could do exactly the same for households. But at the moment, even though solar panels are going to be twice as powerful, there's an arbitrary limit of how much solar you can put on without asking permission on a roof. That needs to go. Secondly, suppose I generate some solar energy on my roof and I want to share it with you next door through the local network. Obviously, the electricity isn't going to get as far as a substation, but I'm going to pay transmission charges, or my energy company are going to meter and charge energy transmission charges as if the electricity was being shipped from Drax, from a power station the other end of the country, through both the national grid and the local distribution network, not just your local substation area. So that seems insane. It is insane. It has to change, but it's what I call a software problem, not a hardware problem. It's just an arbitrary limit, and we have to find a way to hack the system and then change the rules. Thirdly, it's not easy yet to put a solar farm across the roofs of a city and sell the electricity to an energy company and then have people pay for that electricity as they use it, which is what we want to do in the network that I'm helping form, a resilience network. Similarly, if you're living in, say, a retirement home or a bunch of council flats, you may have a roof, but you may have a load of flats. And the question is, how do you generate the solar and share it between people easily? And that's just a software problem. You ought to be able to put a big solar array on the roof of a place and just share the electricity between the users. So that's something to be solved. That's code for, at the moment, community energy groups are beavering away, trying to figure out how you get to carbon neutral. And councils like Bristol City Council with its City Leap exercise are doing the same thing. Are we working together and integrating it all so that we get to carbon neutral together optimally? No, we are not. So we're not even talking properly, intelligently to create a smart energy system of the future. Point number 6, this is politically contentious. To a lot of people, including friends of ours, it's absolutely obvious that before you put renewable energy on roofs, you should first insulate houses so that you aren't using energy, right? The energy you don't use is obviously the cheapest energy. And I say, it's completely obvious, but that's wrong. It could take, I did a project where it took 6 months to retrofit a house, probably costing about £50,000, and that would have reduced its energy need by 50%. Whereas in one day, we could have put 10 kilowatts of solar on the roof and generated more energy than the house uses in an entire year. So it actually, after a while, when renewable energy becomes really, really cheap, you can effectively stop thinking about the need. Yes, lovely to insulate and have a warm house, but if the energy gets cheaper and cheaper, then we're in a better state. And seventh, there's a group lobbying the government to help communities generate their own energy and sell it to themselves. I've met the people doing this. I'm not convinced that what they will do will work best for us yet. So I'm calling that a snake, because at the moment, government action, as often as not, trips up what communities are trying to do. So Bristol set up its own energy company, and for a while they required us to work with them. So that was blackmail. And then they sold the energy company off. So the project died and we lost £50,000 in grant funding. So don't trust your government, trust your own community. And okay, I've got two pieces here. One, do the numbers stack up? And the other is, so how do we exploit this? But first, I'm going to show the numbers do stack up. There's room on Bristol for a gigawatt of solar panels, which would cost us 500 million to, it says 1.2 million. That should say 1.2 billion. That's a typo. So it could cost a billion. Yeah. Oh, okay, that's right. The panels cost 500 to 1.2 million per megawatt. The cost of Bristol would be 500 million to 1.2 billion for a whole gigawatt. It would generate a terawatt hour of electricity a year, which, if you sold it at the retail price of 30 pence a unit, you would bill 300 million a year for it. Well, 300 million obviously pays off 500 million to 1.2 billion in 3 or 4 years or less. So you say, well, let's not charge people what the current price of energy is. Let's give them a third or a half discount. You're still getting 100 to 150 million a year, which is, and these panels last for 30 years, but that 100 to 150 million would pay off the cost of the panels in 10 years or less. And it would create savings of 150 to 200 million a year to households. And it would create a payback to the community. Some of that money would go to the community. So net result is we are able to cut the cost of electricity to 10 pence a unit. And once you've paid off the cost of the solar panels, then you would be able to charge people threepence to fourpence a unit for their electricity, a tenth of what you're being charged at the moment during this energy so-called crisis. This is why during this year, another miracle, during this year, I found somebody who wanted to form a resilience network, bringing together local community hubs and neighborhood partnerships, uniting them to adapt and mitigate to climate change when they're already overstretched to do the things they're committed to do to reduce emissions, climate action. We're thinking we can help raise money by using them to promote community renewables, and that communities generating their own energy is the best way to generate energy. Why? Because they'll pass on the savings to themselves, not to multinationals and governments. We have capital finance already potentially on offer, and we were smart enough to not rely on a Labour government saying, first of all, they're going to have 28 billion for this, and then, oh no, they aren't. As Mark Carney said, the changes are being driven by economics, not politics now. So it doesn't depend on waiting for government help. And a community centre could be the one-stop shop that you go to for all the advice and finance you need, and could help organise these whole street demonstrations like I demonstrated in the first picture. So you have a network that brings together neighbourhood partnerships, community hubs, and community experts, plus whatever other help is available in the community. This is from a proposal I did to basically to put innovation hubs in all our community centres so that you'd raise money for young people to do smart work. I'm right near the end. Yeah, I asked an AI if it would like to write a poem about the challenges, and that's not to delay things. And it came up with some verses. Not everybody likes poems written by AI, but I assure you, it's 10 times as good as anything I could come up with. Whoops, went away. Going the wrong way too now. Okay, I can't see the very top line. The sun is shining in the sky, a source of power, clean and free. But many people wonder why they can't install it easily. The cars are running on the road, they need the fuel, they cause pollution. But there is a better mode that offers a greener solution. The solar panels and electric cars are cheap and efficient, they save money. But there are obstacles and bars that make the process hard and funny. The regulation and the laws, the taxes and the fees, the permits and the flaws, the lobbyists and the sleaze. They all prevent the change we need. They all protect the status quo. They all ignore the planet's plead. They all resist the way to go. But we can make a difference. We can demand a better choice. We can raise our voice and influence. We can speak as one and rejoice. The energy dilemma is not a fate. It is a challenge we can face. We can adopt a new state. We can create a better place. And I'd like to add, I just asked the AI to come up with a poem about the energy dilemma, the problems we face getting to net zero. And that's what it came up with. And I would add, it doesn't demand us to raise our voice. It just demands us to work together and say, okay, let's put solar on our own roofs. The money's available. We don't have to front it, and we're going to get cheaper energy. In the same way, I fed the same ideas into ChatGPT and asked it to come up with a pitch deck for a business plan. I'm not going to take you through it at all, but it came up with half a dozen slides which describe the problem, the solution, free shared solar energy, energy efficiency upgrades, and climate change improvements, and that we've got money potentially on offer, what the partnership might look like, project timeline, pitch to a seed investor, and additional info. And all this was an AI coming up with this in minutes for me. So just to sum up and to add in one more thing, Elon Musk has just announced that he's building a portable eco home, energy efficient eco home, and it's 2 bedrooms, and it's sort of like a mobile home. It's certainly removable, and it's just $10,000, which is under what I pay for my rent in a year. So if you add on the cost of an electric car that's going to be 5,000, and some solar and stuff, another 2 grand, maybe an e-bike, maybe an e-boat. I'll show you something about boats in a second. I'm right at the end. For $20,000 to $25,000, you could have a house and a car and solar energy, when a house in Bristol now average price about £500,000. So a completely different economy is possible. And when I switch to stop sharing in a moment, I'll show you an example of how that. So you could rent the whole thing. You could pay rent for £100 a week, and that could include a car, an electric bike, and a house, and all the energy you would ever use, all the fuel you'd need for the car and the bike. Last shot. So talking of boats, the fat guy on the right, that's me. This is what I've been doing for the last 8 months. I've been building a boat. and playing with my craft skills. The boat, if you look on the deck, you can see it's got cleats and fair leads, and I made them with my own fair hands. Um, and well,
You're not going quite so fast.
sorry. It will be in the it will be in the notes, and it will be there in the video. And interesting.
Hattie would like you to read it out, David.
Okay.